All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our first podcast. My name is Hamad, and I am the VP of Product at Axia. And I'm sure you guys there's so many podcasts out there, and we didn't want to be just another one. So, the purpose of our podcast series is focused mostly on manufacturing folks, procurement folks, and our goal is to demystify this word data science for you, especially in context of supply chain, and help you leverage the power of data beyond just a checkbox called digital transformation and other initiatives that are run throughout manufacturing organizations. So today we have with us Yacine Mahdid. He's the COO of Axia. Yacine is a data scientist and a neuroscientist, studied PhD from McGill, and he was doing research previously with Shopify, EGC Labs, MNI, and others to name a few. So welcome to the show, Yacine. I'll let you maybe add to that introduction before we can get started.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ahmad. Yeah, so I have a big background in data science, and for the last 3 years and a half, I've been working on applying my knowledge to the supply chain to make like a lot of supply chain a bit more data driven.
Cool. All right. So let's start from the meat. So our title of the podcast is data driven supply chain, right? So data driven, data science, machine learning, AI, all of this is like just so confusing for somebody who's just looking to get into this field. So if you could tell us a bit in like very layman terms, what is maybe small differences or subtleties between this, and as a manufacturer or as somebody from the manufacturing industry, what is it that I should know about these words?
Yeah, definitely. This is a pretty loaded, I would say, title. The one way we could have made it a bit more loaded is just say like supply chain 4.0 or like industry 4.0. There's at the core of all of these terms that we name like machine learning, data science, even deep learning and whatever, there's always the data, right? And that's the part that is most important and that is usually brushed over. It all starts and kind of end with the data. So in this specific podcast, it will be a lot more on the data than the actual application of machine learning or deep learning to specific problem. Because just this, there's a lot of to unpack. So what data-driven supply chain mean is very simple, is that when you're running your supply chain, you should collect and leverage the data that you're collecting to improve your operations in your supply chain. That's just as simple as it is, but you'll see there's a lot of complexity involved, even with just that.
Right, right. No, definitely. I think I guess you read and you see these words being used interchangeably so much that you sort of forget that on the center of it is just data that's out there. Cool. So that's sort of clears out a little bit for us. What do you see as some of the challenges becoming data driven? Why is it so hard? I mean, you go and read any company's value, you'll find one formulation or the other of every company claiming to say we want to be data driven or we are data driven or that sort of drives our decisions. Why is it so hard? Why can't you just do it? Like, why can't you just be data driven?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And this is usually where people jump the gun and they're like, yeah, we need to be like data driven. So let's apply like deep machine learning, AI stuff to all of our problem. But that's kind of a mistake because like the most problematic part, even if you talk to data scientists, is just getting the right data to do your stuff in the right shape, right? And this is where most I've talked to a fair lot of manager executive that really wanted to like transform their operation into a more data driven one, initially through machine learning or whatever complex project that it might. But invariably, what I've seen is that there's a great misconception about how much data you have and if it's good enough, right? And that's kind of the core of most of the issue because when you get some company that gets this, and that understand what is the data that they need in order to do whatever, and they start to collect it properly. Usually the rest is not a problem. Optimizing your stuff when you have the right data, when you can make the right visualization and you can make the right, I don't know, modelization of whatever you need to do or right analysis, it's fairly easy. It's really simple, right? But if like you're thinking that a bunch of PDF or like a bunch of Excel spreadsheet in all of these random format is good enough, you're gonna have a hard time understanding like what's wrong with my organization. So the part that I see that is the bottleneck for most of these companies to truly be data driven is just to understand what is data and how to put it in shape in order for it to be useful. And usually the difference between difference between like a bunch of data that is completely useless and ones that are super useful comes way earlier in the process. And how do you even collect and get that data in the first place? If you're getting data, let's say, let's say we're talking about procurement, right? For some reason, we're talking about procurement, and you're sending a bunch of stuff via email, and you're receiving a bunch of quotes, let's say for a bunch of parts, through PDF format. All of the other company are giving you all of these like a custom shaped PDF, and you put that into like your database or whatever, and you like call it a day. That's it. We got the data. That's pretty poor, because in order to put these in shape and then coalesce them into something that you can use, it will be like a mess, right? Any data scientists that hear the word PDF cringe, because they know it won't be a fun project. If instead at the beginning of this whole thing, right, you just collect the data in a way where you can have like all of the quotes exactly in the same way, exactly the same, whatever it is, a form that you sent out with the exact same field, an Excel spreadsheet that you sent out, and you tell them if you want this contract, you put it into this Excel spreadsheet, and then you collect all of these data points and you put it into the same format every time. There's a huge difference between those two, right? And this is just like the very bootstrap way of doing it, right? But it all starts with how are you collecting the data, and do you understand this difference, that not all data is made the same, right? If you get that, the rest is not too complicated. After that, it's just like, okay, what system do I need in place in order to be able to get my data? How do I get my people to use it? Do I even need to train my folks? If I don't have to train my folks, that's the best, because the data is like automatically gathered. And then can I start to do some analysis with it? Am I missing something? Yes, I go back to where I'm collecting it, and I iterate like that. If you understand that part, usually the bottleneck disappears and it goes somewhere else.
Cool. All right. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, I want to move a little bit towards supply chain. You mentioned an interesting word in the start of our conversation called supply chain 4.0. So, as somebody in procurement or VP of supply chain, I'm already sort of have my blood pressure rising with everything that's happening in the supply chain world today. And now you're introducing a new word called supply chain 4.0. What is this? Should I be scared? Is like robots taking over or something's gonna happen with it? Or like, yeah, walk us through what this is and what are some of the components of this supply chain 4.0, and why is it any different than the previous revolutions that came in supply chain?
Yeah, for sure. Supply chain 4.0 is a funny thing, because it's just like industry 4.0 technology applied to the supply chain, right? So when you actually look at it as a visual, there's a funny one from McKinsey. It's a mess, right? There's a lot of technologies. There's like digitization of document, real-time monitoring, connected machine through IoT, predictive analysis, like 3D printing, integration of computer network, drones and stuff. There's a lot of stuff. If it depends, like, should you be scared? It depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to a consultant, yes, you should be scared. If you're talking to someone internally that look at your stuff and you're like, yeah, we have some issue. Our supply chain is not too optimized. I think we should digitalize it in order to get closer to supply chain 4.0, so that our operation can run better. That's a good signal, right? The actual good signal in all of this thing, like supply chain 4.0 or industry 4.0, is when we talk about the data, right? Because if you don't have data and you try to evolve your operation, whatever it is, right, in HR, in sales, in the warehouse, or literally in the whole supply chain, um, it won't end well. It will be a mess. You're gonna spend a lot of money on something that will have minimal use because you were not able to look at your data and understand exactly where your problems are. Um, that's the main thing. And in supply chain 4.0, the let's say the core thing is really about data, right? About having a good data management capture framework where you're able to take your existing supply chain, nothing changed, but start collecting data at the right spot, right? And just with this, not literally nothing has changed with your operation, but now you're able to have the data points, right? This is already a big step forward into having like this magical idea of supply chain 4.0 where everything is automated. It's where it starts. It's just having quality data that you can trust and you can rely on, and that you collect it, and then you can start to analyze it to figure out what the heck you should be doing next, right? And where is the, let's say, pressure point? Where are the part we're doing great and we should not maybe invest too much time on it? As soon as you have this sort of visibility, it's fantastic. One part in this whole thing, and this is why it's not just industry 4.0 and it's supply chain 4.0, is in industry 4.0, it's like your company, right? It's like I'm Walmart and I'm gonna do better, right? At what Walmart do. So I don't know, you can have a self checkout thing that can record the people and figure out what they want, that is connected to the warehouse and blah blah blah. And the supply chain 4.0 terminology is like it's this plus your partner, right? And that's a mess. Like this is where it gets messy because we're not only talking about ensuring that you can collect data accurately, it's also making sure that you can connect with your partner and collect and share data so that the whole supply chain can get better. So this is the I would say the most tricky part, being able to connect with other organizations which have different level of maturity and incentive to improve, right? If your business is at risk because you're not digitally mature enough, but other businesses are not that at risk for whatever reason, and they're very like primitive in terms of digitalization, trying to make them use your system or whatever is it to gather the data to improve your operation, it's going to be a uphill battle, right? So you just have to be conditioned about this when we're talking about supply chain 4.0. It also involves your suppliers.
Cool. That's an excellent answer. I'd love to dive a little bit deep on the point that you touched about, the whole struggle with data, right? So in manufacturing, as we know, there's like different level of companies and different level of complexities of systems. Some are still using legacy systems. Some are getting a bit there, a bit more advanced in their system, and then there's a lot of these silos that are present. Um, I've worked through some digital transformation projects or IR 4.0 projects, and one of the biggest struggles, or like when you start those projects, is how do you make the data work for you instead of the other way around? It's like this frustration that you're like putting so much effort. Like you mentioned PDFs and emails, right? So when you're trying to say, okay, I want to set up something to capture that or whatever, like I want to be able to track my shipments coming in from the other part of the world. When you start off those projects, it's a lot of, like you said, you called it uphill battle. So how do you generate value out of this? How do you like basically help make the data work for you instead of the other way around?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the very first thing to do here is to do the minimal amount of work, right? Because there's many there's if you try to digitalize your whole organization one shot and then do it and then everything will be done, then we move to the next step. It might not even be 100% possible, right? So for instance, if you, for whatever reason, you're working in a sector where digitalizing your suppliers or like whatever is very difficult, right? Don't start there, right? I would almost ignore this until we fix at least something with data in order to prove that there's a usefulness, right? So where I would always start is what stressed you the most, right? Where in your organization, like there's always problem popping up over there, right? Every time that I look at this department and I hear about it, it's problems, right? Look at this department or this area, right? And figure out how much data you're actually collecting on that particular spot. And if the answer is none, which most problem happen because like they're in the dark spot, try to figure out how to collect the data that you will need in order to solve these problems, right? And by doing this, you can have a very small project where you just, it's kind of like a pilot project. You do a pilot project over there, you start to collect data, and here you can get help from like someone experienced with not just data science, but literally data engineering, right? So someone that is trained to figure out the pipeline that you need in order to make your data useful, right? They will look at your setup and say like, oh shit, this is a big problem. But instead of looking at your whole organization, they will look at this small stuff and they will be able to tell you how you should fix it with the minimal amount of effort. You get the data in a format that even this guy could work with easily, right? So that you know that you can work it with it easily, and you try to solve the problem or predict it or just have some visibility on it, right? Just to be able to eyeball something beforehand and say like, oh, we're gonna have a problem, and then you have the problem. You're like, I called it, right? If you're able to do that with a small pilot project somewhere where there's a lot of problem in your organization, you can get more easily buy-in from the rest of the company, because that's the second part that is difficult. Is if historically your organization was kind of based on emotion, gut feeling, or I don't know, tribal knowledge that has been passed down from generation to generation, and then you're telling everybody, hey guys, we're not doing this anymore. We're gonna do this other thing, and it's gonna cost us like millions of dollars. I mean, at the inevitable first problem that will pop up, right? People will say, "I called it. It didn't work. It shouldn't work. This thing is bad. We should go back to this thing. At least this thing worked, right?" But if you scale it down, right? Make a good case and then show it around. Even if you're the CEO, you show it around to the next department that you have a problem. You can start connecting the dots, right? Don't forget that the supply chain is like your organization, everything that happened and that went through it, plus the other ones, whatever happened and went through it. So if you're trying to do this digitalization, you have to start with a small node and then validate that this was useful, because it will be like, it's just like common sense. If you can see, right, it's better if you cannot see when you're walking outside. Of course it is, right? If you can hear on top of that, that's even better. You can hear a car going around. So that's the same thing. Like if you can see something in your organization, at least you have some data point to do like pattern matching and say like, oh, I've seen this pattern same time before. Something is going on there. No big machine learning, just your brain is enough, and some simple data visualization. And then you build on that, and then this is how you can kind of digitize at some point your whole supply chain and your whole organization.
Cool. All right. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So when it comes to how you do it or how you start, what would your advice be? Should you like try to, in my supply chain team, should I try to hire somebody who's a data engineer? Should I give it to my IT department to take care of it, the infamous IT department, or should I basically go outsource this to a company? Should I go to some of the big guys, the giants of the world, and tell them, hey guys, come on in and start off this project? What is your advice for somebody who clearly sees that there's data points missing or data leaks in my supply chain process? Yeah, well, how would you suggest they start off?
Yeah, definitely. Like here, I would say if you never made a hire like this before, which like most companies that goes through this digitalization do, um, it's a risky bet. Like because now you're kind of hiring someone for fixing your problem that you don't even know what it is because you don't have the expertise internally, right? That's risky. I would not put that up front, especially in manufacturing slash industrial companies. Um, Problem is that there's a tech talent shortage. So if you're trying to attract this, you're gonna pay like a big premium, um, and it's just gonna be hard and slow to get that person. That once they're gonna come up, the expectation will be to the moon in terms of difficulty, right? So what I would suggest here is like first you start small so that you can like scope the problem a bit, and figure out like the best way to get the some minimal amount of data that you need, right? Here I would either work with like a consultant, like an actual person, right? That is expert not just on the machine learning aspect of it, or like the modeling part. Honestly, doesn't matter. Like if you don't even have data, don't think about it. Just don't talk about it. Don't think about it. Right? It's like 5 years down the line. I would start with someone that is very good at data. So if they have some domain expertise, that's even better, right? Consultant that you can put over there, that you can explain your mini project that just involve data, no modeling, and you're like, this area, this is where I want this data. I don't know where to start, and they will give you a bunch of tips. Worst case, it's like a 4-hour conversation, right? And before you get this person part time for like the next 6 months, and then they're just happy because they're there forever. I will kind of start to shop around for um, platform or suppliers or whatever it is that can help you capture that data easily, right? It's a bit easier when it's a bit counterintuitive, but it's a bit easier if your own data is moving through like some external application that was built by really advanced technological people, and then it comes back to your stuff. Because when this happens, it's structured in a fashion that your team can use it, and you can gather this data and do some analysis on it. So maybe something like a small pilot project with some sort of app where you can actually structure the data. And before you start the pilot, you can say something like, hey, can I just get the data to check what this is happening, how this is happening, and what can I collect with this thing? And once you do, well, this is fantastic. Then you have the data, and then you can look at the problem. And even with the app, you can start to see like, is this thing being helpful or stuff like that? I will not advise to go into like a big revamping of whatever system you have, or buy a big module that will from one of the big guys that can solve your stuff. Just something simple, right? And if you can get an area that is simple enough and well contained enough, usually you don't even have to go there, right? You can just change a bit your team way of working so that you can gather a bit of data where you can start to actually visualize something, and this can then unlock some bigger budget or whatever to just fix that whole area and then move on to the next department. That's kind of how I would do it. Yeah, very sequentially in a small increment.
All right. That makes sense. And the trick question. So who should be leading and owning this project, right? Sometimes it's and I guess you've worked with a lot of manufacturers yourself, and everywhere there's a different setup. Which one have you seen to be more successful? Whether it's should I give it to my IT and the IT team that I have? Should I be like, no, this is something I should take ownership of myself while I have a lot of supply chain stuff to take care of? So what would your advice be?
Definitely. The two, I can name them. I don't care. Like the two suppliers, manufacturer that I've seen that were like top notch compared to everybody I've seen before is that this company called Traf. They're a small company that are making like airplane stuff, and SBB, like near Quebec and Montreal. And the common thing between the two is that some very high level in the company understood technology and made this a priority, right? And you can feel the difference. You can feel the difference when you walk into the shop because like you don't see like some riggedy like a notebook that people are just like scribbling around from time to time. Like the data is actually, you see that the data is actually collected and they show it to you because like this is one of the most important stuff I'm doing. And then they show you the machine, let's say that they're running their manufacturing on, like, yeah, this collect that information, this information. Look, our KPIs are literally like broadcasted over there. I'm using Power BI for blah blah blah. The one that I've seen that struggled the most were one where the person was not technical enough, or it was somebody too down in the company that cared about it, and that let's say the owner or the president didn't understand it. So what I would say here is that this should be like at the CEO level almost, or like at the board level of the company almost. Like it for me, it makes intuitive sense because it's not just about this department or that department. It's like the whole organism, like the whole company that you're trying to put like a bunch of eyes on and like a few ears, and like that you're trying to make it in shape so that they can feel more what is happening internally and externally, right? So does this thing have better chance of success? Of course it has better chance of success, right? Than a company which is running like purely on tribal knowledge. So in my view, that should be like a CEO top priority. And if you're listening to this and you're a CEO and or owning the company and you don't have the background, get educated, take a consultant or whatever that will explain to you in clear term, like what does this thing entail. But there's, in my view, there's no choice. Like it's not that will I do it or not. Like everybody is doing it, right? Everybody is doing it. It's becoming a competitive advantage for some company. If you could check every point of your company, being able to collect these accurate data points and being able to then make moves based on these data points, how good your business will be. It will be better, right? So if your competitors are doing this, or somebody in another market that is entering your market is already doing this, they have a competitive advantage that you don't have. And for you, it will be even harder to change because you don't know how to change. So for me, it's a given. You need to be at the utmost level. I need to be like almost a company-wide a transformation that you're undertaking, and it will be different. The feel of the company before and after will be different, and I think it's just like a must, especially in these days of supply chain disruption and stuff.
Cool. So you've also answered my other question about driving a culture of being data driven. It has to be a top down approach. It doesn't work well when it's bottom up. All right, yes. And last question I had for you. So let's say I figure this out, and my supply chain is now, as you called it, data driven. What are some of the competitive advantages, or what challenges do you think I will be able to solve once I start to unleash the power of data in my supply chain?
Yeah, good question. The only like the top benefit I would say is like total flexibility, right? Because if you truly are able to capture all of these data points, right, and then like you have this mega supply chain where you know exactly what's happening at every point, you'll be able to witness trends before they're happening, right? You'll be able to witness like problems way beforehand and make the moves, almost if you were present or whatever. Because most of the problem in the supply chain happen and almost always at the same way. Of course, there's like black swan events that happens, but even then, if you have the flexibility to move because you are able to gather all of this data, you can then make some pretty critical change in your supply chain, and you know why you're doing it. So let's take an example. Let's say you have a bunch of supplier China, a bunch of supplier here, and then COVID hits, China is in lockdown, right? And then you know exactly what was the contribution of these suppliers. You collected all of this data. You know who did what well. What you can do now is you can look at other suppliers like them with the exact same profile, right? And then you just do that. You literally do that. You can like export the profile and say, I'm looking for someone that can do this, right? And then you find a bunch of suppliers rapidly, and you're able to get them on board. You can monitor their capacity if they're getting similar to that company or not. Of course, it will be much higher, but you will be able to calculate how much you're willing to spend on that thing. If you didn't have any data, right, and you're like, oh, my supplier not responding in China anymore, what do? You replace them. Do you know what they were doing before, right? For how much they were doing before, on which part they were good, which part they were not. And if the answer is no, it will be a very risky bet to take a supplier out, because maybe this one was the critical one where you had no choice to rely on it. And it's the only one in the world that can do it. This is where it gets ugly when you don't have this visibility. So yeah, so for me, that will be like one of the main advantage, flexibility, especially in time of disruption, right? Which is like the hallmark of like the last 3 years. I think it's a must right now. Like very rigid supply chain. I think they're kind of a thing of the past. I think all supply chain will need to be in the future data driven and very flexible in order to sustain whatever is coming. Yeah.
Oh, all right. That's yeah. I think in COVID we've all seen what happens when your when your supply chain is not data driven, and what can happen to your manufacturing infrastructure. So cool. Yeah, this has been great. Thank you, Yacine, so much for your time, and thank you to all our listeners for making it through the whole podcast. Please do leave us your feedback and subscribe to our podcast. If you have a success story with data and supply chain, do get in touch. And yeah, that's a wrap from us. Wishing you all a great day ahead.